2017, Hurricane Harvey dumped over 50 inches of rain over Houston, Texas. It was widely rumored that radio stations put an official ban on Texas Flood, written by legendary blues guitarist and Texan Stevie Ray Vaughan. Houston is notoriously one of the most asphalt-ridden, car-centric cities in the country. Water cannot permeate asphalt, meaning every parking lot and road acted as a conduit, rapidly transporting water to the lowest area after the drainage systems were quickly overwhelmed. The damage exceeded $120 billion, making it the second costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. In fact, the 8 costliest natural disasters in U.S. history, adjusted for inflation, are all hurricanes, with the top 7 all occurring since the year 2005, and number 8 occurring in 1992. Now, in 2024, we have what appears to be an unprecedented hurricane season. These weather-related events are regularly cited as "I told you so" events. However, the data says otherwise. Let me be upfront and clear about this. I have not been red-pilled. The climate is, without a doubt, changing, and human influence is certainly part of it. However, the extent of that influence is probably subtle, and it's impossible to determine which events are man-made. Or, in other words, would the hurricanes we are currently seeing have happened if no fossil fuels had ever been burned in the last 200 years? Probably. 2023 was the hottest year on record. The 10 hottest years in recorded history, this goes back to 1880, have all occurred in the last 10 years. But the warming is probably more subtle than you think it is. It's a little over 1 degree Celsius. Claiming that 1 degree Celsius was caused by CO2 alone can't be said with any real confidence. Again, I believe we should develop technologies to loosen our fossil fuel dependency. I think we should especially go toward nuclear. I think EVs are cool. I'm all for being progressive with energy, but I'm not a doomsdayer. And if you want people who think differently than you and people who are on the fence about this issue to join our side, then you shouldn't be either. The Stop Oil people, they're the Westboro Baptist Church of the climate movement. They make people hate you. Telling people they're stupid or saying experts agree, that doesn't work. But you know what does work? The facts. Are the facts different than what the talking points on the left are? For the most part, yeah. But they're also different than the talking points you hear on the right. They think it either isn't real, or they think it's real, but it's because of gay communists and Jews or whatever. So here are the facts. And you might not like this. So you don't think I'm pulling a trust me bro on you. All of my data comes from the Climate Science Special Report, which was published in 2017, and from NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or Administration, one of those two. So none of this information comes from the Heritage Foundation or anything like that. There are more recent studies, such as the NCA5, and that was published last year. And I haven't combed through that as much as I have the CSSR, but from what I've seen, it doesn't conclude anything different from what you're going to hear from me or what's in the CSSR. Here's an example, a quote from the NCA5. Hurricanes have been intensifying more rapidly since the 1980s, and that is marked with high confidence. As you'll see, that statement is true, but it doesn't tell the whole story, and it also doesn't contain a conclusion about the cause. It is just an observation. As I said, the warmest years on record going back to 1980, they're all in the last 10 years. That's a pretty obvious trend. However, the cause, why we ended up with the last 10 years being the hottest 10 years on record, that's probably not because of what you think it is, and it's almost always misrepresented. So here's another graph. And given what you already know, what I just told you, this graph should make sense. There are more record-breaking high temperature days now, and that's why it's hotter. Except that's wrong. This graph is actually just a ratio of record high temperatures, daily records, versus record low temperatures, and it's tracked using what are called running records. So I'm going to show you some other data before explaining. Here are graphs of the coldest and warmest daily temperatures going all the way back to the year 1900. So if you look at this, there's some things that are pretty clear. One, the majority of record high temperatures occurred in the 30s. The other, and you can see that right here. The other thing is that record highs have been flat for about 60 years. And then the third thing is the coldest temperatures are higher now and have been going up over the last several decades than they were throughout the 20th century. That's why recent years are the hottest on record. It's not because high temperatures are going up. It's because low temperatures are going up. The average temperature is higher. So when we say it was the hottest year on record, that's what we're talking about, the overall temperature. You will see headlines and things like new record high temperature broken, but those are going to be in individual places. That is cherry picking data, and those are small data sets. So like, I don't know, in what's it called? Furnace Creek in Death Valley, I think they pretty recently just set the record for the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth. But that's not, you don't talk about a global trend based on what happens in this place or the other place. The opposite of that, we laugh when this happens. I remember when Trump was in office, there was a big blizzard snowstorm around New York City on New Year's, and there were like record cold temperatures, and he said, "So much for global warming," right? That doesn't prove or disprove global warming, and neither do individual record temperatures being broken. I know I said a lot, but to be very clear, we actually aren't breaking new record high daily temperatures in places. Not more so than we were even 50 or 60 years ago. But the average temperature is higher now than ever. Well, in recorded history. Well, not even in recorded history. Since 1880. Probably also in recorded history, but we don't have records of the temperature from when Jesus was around. But the reason is because the low temperatures are warmer than they used to be. This is important because if you want to try to, again, get people on our side, they will nitpick anything that you get wrong. So make sure that you get this correct. Because again, it doesn't mean that there is no climate change. It doesn't mean that global warming isn't happening. It is. But we have to get the facts right. It's unfortunate that you can be lazy and sloppy and just continue believing in things that are wrong. And you have to be perfect to try to get people to change their mind. But that is the task that we have. Another thing about climate modeling, this is a little bit tangential, but here's a series of climate models. And yes, today it is warmer, but remember those record high temperatures in the 30s and 40s? That's this hump over here. What's really weird is our current climate models don't actually do a very good job of explaining that warming in the 30s and 40s. Now, you can make a model that emphasizes carbon and that does a pretty good job of modeling the temperatures in the last few decades, but it doesn't do nearly as good of a job at correctly modeling the temperatures in the 30s and 40s. And that means that there's something missing in the model. So we can't definitively say that carbon is the whole story. So moving on to hurricanes, because that's the big thing, although we're going to talk about tornadoes and floods and fires and those sorts of things as well. This is a graph of temperature anomalies in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, today with the warmer planet and these hurricanes that we're seeing, that follows a trend where the temperatures in the ocean are warmer. And for a lot of the talking points and headlines you'll see about hurricanes, they'll typically give you that data starting in the 80s. So be a little bit suspicious when the data only goes for a few decades. This isn't it's an unrelated topic, but it's very much a related sort of theme. You hear stuff about like the crime rate. A couple years ago, they said the crime rate went up higher from this year to the other year, more so than it has in the last, like, whatever they said, 100 years or something like that. Well, the deal with that was, that was true. The crime rate had gone up more than it had in a very long time, but the overall crime rate is drastically lower today. I'm sure you all know of the precipitous drop of violent crime in the 90s. When you're dealing with really small numbers, going from 1% to 2%, that's an increase of 100%. That's not how dramatic it was, but that's just an example. And so you can say there was a 100% increase, but that betrays the fact that the rate is still multiple times lower today than it was only a couple of decades ago. Anyways, getting back to this. Yes, the ocean temperatures are much warmer than they were a few decades ago, but a few decades before that, they were much warmer and as warm as they are today. So we see an oscillating trend here. Yet I just know that people are going to attack this. It's true that the data fits the hypothesis that more people, more emissions, more carbon, although our emissions of greenhouse gases are actually going down pretty noticeably, that would predict greater temperatures, and that is the pattern we see. Yes, however, that hypothesis would not predict that temperatures would go down. And that is also what happens in this graph. The temperature also goes down. So yes, it fits part of it, but not the rest of it, meaning we don't have the whole story. Now, again, I'm not saying what I'm doing here to make it simple. I'm advocating for more agnosticism in this. I'm not telling you that our activities don't warm the planet and don't have an influence on hurricanes. The extent of either of each of those things, you just can't say with a ton of confidence that we're causing this much of it. I have two superimposed graphs here. So remember that quote from earlier, way back, where it said the number of category 4 and 5 hurricanes are going up. Now that's true if you look at this data and you look at this trend line here since the 80s, but when we zoom out, we see that it does a very good job of matching the ocean temperatures. We have an oscillation here. This graph is pretty ugly. I couldn't find a very good version of the graph. Here's what it looks like when you look at the data for only the last few decades. And yeah, that's an upward moving trend. But when we zoom in and look at a century's worth of data, we see an oscillating trend. The mantra or the hypothesis of more carbon, higher temperatures, more energy in the oceans, more frequent category and category 5 hurricanes, that holds up with recent decades. But overall, when we look at the data trend, it's actually not there. You probably can't read, but this is a graph of, well, on the left here on the bottom, this is the graph of the overall number of hurricanes. Again, it's up recently, but it's part of an oscillating trend. And here's the graph of major hurricanes. Yes, there's been a big increase, but we're at 1950s and 60s levels. There's more carbon in the atmosphere now than there was back then. I'll make this bigger so you can read it too, but if we look at that paragraph on the left, there has been no significant trend in the global number of tropical cyclones, nor has any trend been identified in the number of U.S. landfalling hurricanes. The quote we heard earlier was that there's high confidence, which is like 90% or greater, that category 4 and 5 hurricanes and hurricanes overall are increasing in frequency in the last few decades. That's completely true. But again, when we zoom out and look at the last century, there is no general increase, and that quote says nothing about the cause behind it. Obviously, the link between ocean temperatures and the hurricanes, they would say very high confidence for that as well, but an anthropogenic cause is not said anywhere to be the cause with any level of confidence. Here is a graph of tornadoes by year, and the tornadoes are going way up. This is another thing that you see and hear about. However, this phenomenon is caused by a counting bias. Let me show you a different graph. This is the number of F3 or greater tornadoes since the 1970s. And if we notice, this has gone down significantly. I will add, because somebody told me this on TikTok, that website right there, climateataglance.com, is apparently a climate change denial website. But this graph comes from NOAA. I grabbed it off of Google. I've seen the exact same graph in this book here. They didn't manipulate the graph. I simply chose it because it was the best looking graph. So what's going on with the tornado data? How can there be more tornadoes, but fewer powerful tornadoes? Well, it's due to a counting bias. Today, 60% of tornadoes are EF0. I thought it only went down to 1, but apparently it goes down to 0. Those are by far the most common, which makes sense. It's like earthquakes, the magnitude between 1 and 2 earthquakes. Those are orders of magnitude more common than more powerful earthquakes. In 1950, EF0 tornadoes only accounted for 20% of all of the tornadoes that were recorded. So we went from 60 to 20. How's that possible? Because in the 50s, I don't even know if Doppler radar for weather was a thing in the 50s, but the technology back then, whatever they had, simply wasn't good or sophisticated and sensitive enough to capture these weakest tornadoes. If somebody didn't see the EF0 tornado, it wouldn't leave a trail behind, and so they did not get counted. Again, the overall trend is the more powerful tornadoes are actually less common. Here's a very weird trend, and we have no idea why this is. The number of days a year where there are tornadoes is going down, but of those days where there are tornadoes, there are more tornadoes on those days. Now, if that didn't make any sense, just think about it this way. Say one year there was one tornado every single day, and then the next year there are the same number of tornadoes, but it's because there are 7 tornadoes every Wednesday. That's just an analogy, but that is the type of pattern we are seeing, and I just find that to be fascinating. What about floods and record snowfall? Well, we are in a very high period, but again, this is part of an overall oscillating trend. And so saying that more carbon is the reason why we see what we see today is just not something that we can claim with good confidence. Something I should have mentioned was the deal with cost. The main reason why natural disasters keep getting more expensive is because we just simply have more people and more infrastructure. I didn't grab a graph from the internet, but droughts globally are also doing the same thing. They're oscillating. They go up and down. There hasn't been a steady upward trend in those globally either. Now, what about fires? Well, funny enough, the global trend is actually going down. Now, admittedly, this data doesn't go back very far, but collecting data on fires is that's very difficult, and it's kind of in its infancy. We've only had the satellite technology to do this since the late 90s. The downward trend is actually the most significant reason behind that is thought to be as poor parts of the world become richer, become more developed, they can either buy or they're being given farming equipment. That means they have to rely less on slash and burn agriculture. Slash and burn agriculture is a huge contributor to the greenhouse effect and to it's like one of the major causes of fires. So funny enough, and this is a tangent that I probably won't get into today, but the best thing we can do for the developing world is actually get them on board with fossil fuels as fast as possible, because it's the fastest way to give them usable, cheap energy that they can use to develop and basically, if you want to solve world problems like pollution and inequality and whatever, you need to make the population as rich as you can, as fast as you can. And contrary to what you might think, the fossil fuels are not that dirty. In the developing world, The rate of asthma, for example, is extraordinarily high because people burn wood and coal in their homes to heat them and to cook food. A natural gas or coal burning plant miles away doesn't pollute your home. I mean, it might a tiny bit, like with the air or whatever, but that's drastically better than actually burning the material in your own house. Yes, alternative energy is great, but it's vastly more expensive and sometimes more complex. And I mean, hydroelectric dams can only be built in certain places. Wind turbines only work in certain times of the day. Solar only works certain times of the day. I said I wasn't going to get into this, and then I got into it pretty deep. Now, fires globally versus regionally is a different picture. Fires are becoming more common in the Western United States, and regional droughts. I mean, I live in California. We know all about this. But all of the droughts, they are contributing factors. But improvements in forest management and education and activism, they actually significantly reduce these events because people cause 85% of fires in the United States. So it's not as simple as, well, if it's hotter and drier, lightning, which is always there, is just going to light more of these fires. The real story is, without humans, we'd have fewer fires, but not because of our greenhouse emissions, because we just accidentally start fires. And going back to all the stuff I was saying earlier, I'm an optimist, and I'm an advocate for fossil fuels in the developing parts of the world. And I gave you the explanation for why that is. But since we're talking about natural disasters, I want you to just try to guess how many people on average die from natural disasters in the United States every year. And natural disasters would include earthquakes, volcanic activity, landslides, drought, wildfires, storms, and flooding. It doesn't include pandemics. The answer, and if you haven't guessed yet, pause here so you can do that. But the answer is 436. 100 years ago, it was 341. Now, that's an increase, but the population of the United States is 3 times greater than it was back then. The technology and the infrastructure we've been able to build, and this includes like hospitals that are able to be on all the time and roads and things like that, those have mitigated the supposed risks from natural disasters, like us causing more natural disasters, which we can't say that we are, but even if we were, the technology that is helped created by the thing that caused it is actually mitigating almost all of the side effects. The global trend in deaths from natural disasters is far more remarkable than what we see in the United States, because we had one of the highest standards of living 100 years ago too. The average number of people who will die in natural disasters globally, year by year, is a little over 38,000. 100 years ago, the average was 500,000. And the world population 100 years ago was 1/4 what it is today. So in other words, a person today is well over 50 times less likely to die of a natural disaster than they were a century ago. And the biggest reason for that is advances in technology and infrastructure. The fastest way to ensure that people build up infrastructure and technology for now is fossil fuels. You can think of it like you don't have enough money to buy a car, so you have to walk to work. Eventually you will have enough money to buy a car, but you have to walk to work for now. You can't say, well, I can't drive to work, so I'm not going to go to work. Then you'll never have a car. There are problems with fossil fuels, but by and large, the problems they cause are vastly canceled out by the benefits they produce. And the only way we're going to get to technologies that can replace fossil fuels is if we use fossil fuels to develop the infrastructure for those technologies. If we get rid of fossil fuels, our level of progress on this will simply stagnate. And that is a different kind of inconvenient truth.